Poon Lim. The date is November 23rd, 1942, and the British merchant ship SS Benlamund is sailing through the South Atlantic when a German U-boat's torpedo slams into its hull. The ship sinks in less than 2 minutes, and of the 53 crew members aboard, only one survives the initial sinking. His name was Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor working as a second steward. As the ship went down, Poon managed to grab a life vest and jump into the freezing water. For 2 hours, he floated in the debris field, searching desperately for anything that could keep him alive. Finally, he spotted an 8-foot by 8-foot wooden life raft bobbing in the waves. Poon pulled himself onto the raft and took stock of his supplies. He had a jug of water, some biscuits, a few flares, a flashlight, and some rope. He did the math. If he were extremely careful, these supplies might last him 30 days. In the first few weeks, Poon rationed everything meticulously. A few sips of water per day and a bite of a singular biscuit. But he knew the supplies wouldn't last forever. If he wanted to survive for longer, he had to figure out how to get food and water from the ocean itself. Using the wire spring from his flashlight, Poon fashioned a crude fishhook. He used biscuit crumbs as bait and managed to catch small fish. It wasn't much, but it was something. And for water, he drank the fish's blood, which was just enough to avoid dying from dehydration. He would continue living like this for over 2 months. But one day, Poon spotted a dark shape circling his raft. A shark. Most people would panic, but Poon saw an opportunity. He was running out of food, and this shark represented days, maybe weeks of meat and blood. So he fashioned his rope into a lasso, and when the shark came close enough, he threw it, catching the shark by its tail. And with every bit of his remaining strength, he wrestled it onto his tiny raft and killed it with his water jug, using it as a club. For the next several days, Poon was living like a king, drinking the shark's blood and eating its meat, carefully drying strips in the sun to preserve them. He knew this would buy him at least a few more weeks of survival. But the ocean wasn't done testing him yet, because soon after, a violent storm would hit, causing waves to throw Poon's raft around. When it finally passed, Poon discovered that his water container had been destroyed, and most of his carefully preserved supplies were gone. He had to start over from scratch. Now, more desperate than ever for water, Poon managed to catch a seagull with his bare hands. He drank its blood for hydration and used the carcass as bait for more fish. And then came perhaps the cruelest torture of all. Ships actually began passing by, and planes flew overhead. Poon would frantically wave, fire his flares, do anything to get their attention. Some ships even came close enough that he could see people on deck. But no matter what he did, they just wouldn't stop for him. They simply sailed right past him. Whether they didn't see him or chose not to stop is unknown. But it could have possibly been because of his Asian appearance during a time of war between China and Japan. Regardless, the psychological agony of being so close to rescue, only to watch it sail away, was almost worse than the physical suffering. And soon enough, Poon would surpass the 100-day mark, then 110, then 120. But on April 5th, 1943, a Brazilian fisherman finally spotted Poon's raft off the coast of Brazil. He had been adrift for a total of 133 days. Over 4 months alone at sea, he had drifted approximately 1,200 miles from where his ship initially sank. When they pulled him aboard, Poon was emaciated and weak, but somehow he had survived. In fact, the British Royal Navy was so impressed by his survival techniques that they incorporated them into their own training manuals, and King George VI awarded him the British Empire Medal. To this day, 133 days remains the world record for the longest survival on a life raft. And hopefully, it's a record that will never be broken. Joseph Barrel, June 6, 1944, D-Day. Joseph Barrel, a paratrooper with the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, the same unit that would later be immortalized in the Band of Brothers show, jumped from his C-47 transport plane into the darkness over Normandy. His mission was to drop in behind enemy lines, cause chaos, and help secure the beaches for the invasion. But things didn't go exactly according to plan, because 4 days after D-Day, on June 10th, Barrel was captured by German forces. He was sent to Stalag 12A, a prisoner of war camp. For most soldiers, capture meant sitting out the rest of the war behind barbed wire. But Joseph Barrel wasn't most soldiers. Within weeks of arriving at the POW camp, he managed to escape. But he was quickly recaptured, so they sent him to a different camp, thinking that would solve the problem. But he somehow escaped again and got captured again. The Germans, fed up with his antics, transferred him to Stalag 3C, a more secure facility. Barrel would spend months here waiting and planning. He knew the Soviets were pushing west. He just had to get out and reach them. So in the dead of winter, January of 1945, Beryl made his third escape attempt. This time he succeeded. Now, most escaped prisoners of war attempt to head westward back towards Allied lines, but Beryl was hundreds of miles deep inside Nazi-occupied Poland. There was no chance he would make it that far. So instead, he headed eastward toward the advancing Soviet army. For weeks, he moved through the frozen landscape, hiding during the day and traveling at night. He had no maps, limited supplies, and the constant threat of German patrols. But somehow he stayed free. Then one day, he finally encountered what he had been searching for. Soviet tanks, a column of T-34s cruising through the Polish countryside. Beryl approached carefully, hands raised, trying to make it clear he wasn't a threat. The tank commander was a woman named Alexandra Samosenko, one of the few female tank commanders in the Soviet army. When this ragged, half-frozen man stumbled out of the woods speaking English and claiming to be an American paratrooper, she was understandably suspicious. But Beryl still had his dog tags, he still had remnants of his American uniform, and his story, as crazy as it sounded, was seemingly true. And ultimately, Samosenko let him join her unit. For the next month, Joseph Beryl, an American paratrooper, fought alongside the Soviet Red Army. He rode in their tanks, fought in their battles, and helped them push west against the Germans. Then came one of the most surreal moments of his story. Samosenko's tank battalion attacked a German-held POW camp as part of their advance. They punched through the defenses, scattered the guards, and liberated the prisoners. It was the same camp Beryl had escaped from months earlier. He had helped to liberate his own former prison. But the war wasn't finished with Joseph Beryl yet. During a German dive bomber attack, Beryl was seriously wounded. Bomb shrapnel tore through his body, and he was evacuated to a Soviet military hospital. While recovering, he met someone who would change his life, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the most successful and decorated military commander in Soviet military history. Zhukov was fascinated by this American soldier who had fought alongside Soviet forces, so he helped arrange Beryl's transfer back to American custody. When Beryl finally made it back to American lines and then home to the United States, he discovered something shocking. His family had been told he was killed in action. His name was on memorial walls listing the dead. His parents had mourned him. Coming back from the dead was a shock to everyone. Joseph Beryl became the only American soldier in World War II to fight for both the United States Army and the Soviet Red Army. His story seemed too crazy to be true, but every bit of it was documented and verified. Years later, his son, John Beryl, became the United States ambassador to Russia from 2008 to 2012, continuing his father's unique connection to the country. Alistair Urquhart. It's February 1942, and Singapore had just fallen to the Japanese in what Winston Churchill called the worst disaster in British military history. Alistair Urquhart, a Scottish soldier, became one of over 80,000 Allied prisoners of war, and the Japanese had a job for these prisoners. They were going to build a railway through 260 miles of dense jungle, connecting Thailand and Burma. What became known as the Death Railway would require lots and lots of prisoner labor, and Urquhart was sent to one of the work camps along the railway. What followed was 9 months of absolute hell. Prisoners worked from before dawn until after dark, moving earth, laying track, building bridges, and so on. The work was intentionally made to be as brutal as possible, with suffocating heat, merciless guards who tortured prisoners for no reason at all, and just enough food to barely sustain life. But then came the diseases. Alistair Urquhart contracted cholera, malaria, dysentery, and beriberi all at the same time. Any one of these diseases should have killed him. Having all four simultaneously was essentially a death sentence. Around him, men died by the dozens every day, and their bodies were stacked in piles, left to decay in the jungle. But somehow Urquhart survived. His body fought off all four diseases. When other men gave up and died, Urquhart clung to life with desperate determination. 9 months of this hell, 9 months of disease, starvation, beatings, and watching his friends die. Just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, the Japanese moved him. In 1944, Urquhart and 900 other POWs were packed into the cargo hold of a Japanese transport ship, which the prisoners called a hell ship. They were crammed below the decks with almost no ventilation or light. The ship was sailing into the South China Sea, making its way to Japan. What the Japanese didn't know was that an American submarine was hunting in these waters. The USS Grouper spotted the Japanese ship. It had no way of knowing Allied POWs were locked in the hold below, thinking it was just carrying Japanese military supplies. The submarine fired its torpedoes. When the torpedoes hit, the ship began to sink immediately. Urquhart was trapped in the hold as water rushed in. All around him, men were screaming and drowning in the dark. He fought his way through dead bodies and debris, struggling toward any opening, any way out. The ship was going down fast. Somehow, Urquhart made it to the surface. Seconds later, the ship disappeared beneath the waves, taking hundreds of men with it. Urquhart was in the open ocean now, covered in fuel oil that burned his skin and temporarily blinded him. He found a piece of wreckage and clung to it. For 5 days, Alistair Urquhart drifted in the ocean. With nothing to eat, severe burns covering his body, blindness, and delirious from dehydration. The sun scorched him during the day, and at night, the cold nearly killed him. He watched as other survivors around him gave up and slipped beneath the waves. On the 5th day, a Japanese whaling ship spotted him. They pulled him from the water, barely alive. The Japanese took the survivors to a camp near Nagasaki. Urquhart was forced to work in the mines. He was still recovering from the hell ship experience, still barely clinging to life, when the date struck August 9th, 1945. That morning, Urquhart was in the labor camp about 10 miles from the city center of Nagasaki when the sky turned white. The atomic bomb detonated over Nagasaki with the force of 21,000 tons of TNT. The shockwave hit the camp with such force that buildings toppled and windows shattered. Urquhart felt the blast wave roll over him and saw the mushroom cloud rising over the sky. He was roughly 10 miles from ground zero, close enough to feel the heat and power, but just far enough to survive. Days later, the war ended, and Alistair Urquhart was liberated. He weighed just 82 pounds compared to his usual 135. He had survived the death railway and diseases that should have killed him, survived a hell ship being torpedoed, and 5 days adrift in the ocean, and had survived an atomic bomb. It would take him years to recover physically, and even longer to recover mentally. For decades, he barely spoke about what he had endured. It was only later in his life that he finally wrote a memoir. Telling his story to the world, Alistair Urquhart ultimately lived to be 97 years old and is often regarded as one of the luckiest individuals of World War II.